NEC Section 404.9d addresses the use of time clocks, sensors, or other devices as a disconnecting means. Specifically, it states that these devices may be used to comply with the requirements of 404.9 and 404.9b for ground fault circuit interrupter protection, commonly known as GFCI protection. This means a time clock can serve as a disconnect under certain conditions, primarily related to GFCI requirements. To understand the implications fully, it's important to delve into what 404.9 and 404.9b stipulate. These sections detail the specific instances where GFCI protection is mandatory for switches controlling lighting and other equipment. For example, 404.9 generally requires GFCI protection for switches controlling lighting outlets and other equipment in specific locations such as bathrooms, kitchens, and outdoor areas. Similarly, 404.9b may address GFCI protection for switches controlling specific types of equipment or located in certain hazardous locations. The allowance for a time clock to act as a disconnecting means is directly tied to these GFCI protection requirements. The code recognizes that a time clock can effectively de-energize a circuit, thereby providing a level of safety equivalent to a manual disconnect, especially when combined with GFCI protection. The critical aspect is that the time clock must reliably interrupt the circuit's power supply. It needs to be appropriately rated for the voltage and current it will be switching. The time clock must be installed correctly according to the manufacturer's instructions. Its operation should be verified to ensure it functions as intended. When using a time clock as a disconnect, it is crucial to ensure it meets all applicable safety standards and is listed or approved for its intended use. Underwriters' Laboratories listing signifies that a product has been tested and meets specific safety requirements. Local electrical inspectors have the final authority on whether an installation complies with the NEC and other applicable codes. Therefore, consulting with the local inspection authority before implementing a time clock as a disconnecting means is always advisable. It is crucial to understand that the allowance for using a time clock as a disconnect is not a blanket permission. It is contingent upon meeting the requirements of 404.9 and 404.9b related to GFCI protection. The specific application and location of the circuit being controlled will determine whether a time clock is an acceptable disconnecting means. In environments like swimming pools, where electrical safety is paramount, the use of time clocks as disconnects might be subject to additional scrutiny and requirements. It is important to consult with a qualified electrician to determine whether a time clock is an appropriate disconnecting means for a specific application. The time clock should be readily accessible so that it can be easily operated and reset if needed. The installation must comply with all applicable NEC requirements and local codes. Furthermore, the time clock should be properly labeled to clearly identify its function as a disconnecting means. This helps ensure that anyone working on the electrical system understands how to de-energize the circuit. Another consideration when using time clocks as disconnects is the potential for unintended consequences. For example, if the time clock is programmed incorrectly or malfunctions, it could interrupt power to critical equipment or systems. Therefore, it is important to carefully consider the potential risks and benefits before using a time clock as a disconnecting means. Periodic inspection and testing of the time clock are also essential to ensure its continued proper operation. It is also vital to ensure that the time clock is rated for the environment in which it is installed. For example, if the time clock is installed outdoors, it must be rated for wet locations. If it is installed in a corrosive environment, it must be made of materials that are resistant to corrosion. The selection of the appropriate time clock for the application is critical to ensuring its safety and reliability. In summary, the NEC permits the use of time clocks, sensors, or other devices as disconnecting means to comply with GFCI protection requirements as specified in Section 404.9d. However, this allowance is not unconditional. It is important to consult the NEC, Underwriters, Laboratories standards, and local electrical codes, and to seek guidance from qualified electrical professionals to ensure that any installation meets all applicable safety requirements. The focus should always remain on ensuring electrical safety and preventing electrical hazards.